Hello, and welcome to ELCA Advocacy Starter Kit sessions. During session 2, we'll reflect on the question, how do I approach policymakers? My name is Joey Chin, and I'm the Communications Hunger Advocacy Fellow with ELCA Advocacy. During this session, which originally aired in 2021, you'll hear insights from experienced leaders engaged in faith-based advocacy. Today, you'll hear from John Johnson, who will ground us in understanding who policymakers are and who we are in the process. We're also fortunate to be hearing from Treylon Shorter, who will share with us some of her Hill experience, particularly 5 tips to help us understand and have successful and impactful meetings. From the ELCA DC-based staff, we will hear from Andrew Fuller and Taina Diaz-Reyes, who will give us some information on meeting scheduling and role preparation for visiting with a policymaker. And bringing the state perspective, we have Regina Banks from the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in California, who will help us look at how impactful we can be on the local level. And finally, we'll hear from Robin McCants, who comes to us from the ELCA's Southeast Michigan Synod. She will share with us some of her early experiences doing visits with policymakers and what she has learned. We thank you for joining us today and are excited to share this session with you on how we can approach policymakers. Thanks for being here and enjoy the session.
Hello. Welcome to our second edition of Advocacy Summer School. My name is John Johnson, and I serve as the Program Director for Domestic Policy with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in our Witness in Society office in Washington, D.C. You may formerly know that as ELCA Advocacy. My job today is to help us have a conversation about engaging and how to talk with policymakers. I think we have to remember at the beginning of the day that a policymaker is just like you and me. They are exactly like you and me. Policymakers love their families, they love their communities, and they love their country. And when somebody decides to put their name forward to run for an office, whether it's a school board or a local board or Congress or Senate, they are taking a huge risk and they are putting themselves out for public service. Policymakers work for us, however, not the other way around. We are the constituents, and policymakers want to hear from us. They want to know our opinions, and they want to know what we care about. That's why they ran for the job in the first place. I want to also talk about the elected official, but also the staff. So many times staff who work for elected officials are extremely knowledgeable, and they spend a lot of time understanding the weeds of any number of public policy issues. If you have an opportunity to develop relationships with staff, this is a fantastic way of making sure that your voice is connected to that policymaker. Where do we find policymakers? Well, obviously, you can go to their office and you can go to any number of websites that we'll make available where you can sometimes just simply put in your zip code, and then they will line all up about who is your policymaker, who is your elected officials. But most policymakers have an office at the federal level. It's both here in Washington and back in a state and at regional and district offices. And so opportunities to engage with policymakers happen all the time because they are either here in Washington, where you also often come, or they're back in their states, where it's often a lot easier to meet with them. One of the things that is really important to a policymaker are the issues that you care about. One of the challenges is talking to a policymaker at a time when that issue that you care about is not at the forefront of the issue that they are working on. However, that doesn't mean that they don't care about that issue. But it does mean that we have to be strategic sometimes in finding the ways that we get to that policymaker. Often we can have a conversation about an issue that they care about, and then make sure that we weave in the issue that we care about. And that's just one technique among many of how we can engage our policymakers in conversations that we care about. Policymakers also are just like you and me. They have good days and they have bad days. They like their privacy, then they also want to be in the public eye. And we just have to come at it from a place of respect and wanting to build a relationship with this policymaker. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. We've spent a whole year and a half being disconnected from each other, our families, and the rest of our communities. But this is an opportunity now to develop a relationship with our policymakers, talk about the future, talk about how we care about the world around us, and make sure that we are informing them and keeping them engaged in what is happening both in our backyard and around the world. At the end of the day, we will make our voices heard best by being authentically ourselves and developing a personal relationship. I'm delighted that we have colleagues who are actually on the Hill joining us, and so I'll turn it over to them.
Well, greetings, advocates. My name is Trelon Shorter, and I am the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP, and we're based here in Washington, D.C. Well, I'm delighted to be with you virtually, and I'm hoping that I can share with you and the experiences that I've had as a former congressional staffer and former staffer for elected officials in New Jersey. I've spent about a decade of my career working in legislative affairs directly for elected officials, and it has been one of the most rewarding times of my career, and I hope that you will be able to benefit from those experiences. So let me run through 5 tips that will help you have a successful and impactful meeting with elected officials. So tip number 1, you want to do your homework. You're going to want to spend a little bit of time before your meeting to do a bit of research on who your lawmaker is and what their position has been on issues of interest for you, and put together a very nice digital packet of resources that you can share in advance or after your meeting with the person you're having your meeting with. Tip number 2, you want to organize your meeting and determine roles. And by that, you know that elected officials are beholden to constituents, but not every constituent is created equal. And so with there being strength in numbers, you're definitely encouraged to build a coalition and bring those members of your coalition together for a meeting. And when you do that, you'll want to organize your meeting so that you've got 4 to 5 roles established. So a facilitator, particularly someone who's got a relationship with the elected official or their staff who could help guide the conversation. You want to have an issue expert, maybe a program administrator, or someone on the ground who's familiar with the policy issue that you're seeking solution for. You also want to have a person who can provide a personal impact story, really making a compelling case for why the program or policy is needed, why it might need funding. And so that is another person that you'll want to bring to the table with you in your meeting. And then 4th, you'll want to have someone in the meeting who will be able to make the ask. And that is perhaps it's your meeting facilitator. And we'll talk a little bit more about the nature of your ask in tip number 4. But on to tip number 3. Your mom was always right. And so you're going to want to spend a little bit of time saying thank you, minding your P's and your Q's. And so it's generally a good idea to start your meeting by finding something to thank the office for, whether it's taking a vote on a position or co-sponsoring a bill, or just simply for just meeting with you. You'll want to use that time to say thank you, and that sets a good tone for the meeting. And typically elected officials and their staff, who doesn't appreciate receiving a note of thanks or appreciation and positive feedback. So now to tip number 4, you're going to want to ask for what you want. And so once you've established rapport and you've gone over the purpose of the meeting and shared facts and the personal impact story, that now would be the time to hone in on what it is that you want the lawmaker to do. And so that's typically your ask. And you should have someone who can explain it in a succinct way, why it's in the lawmaker's best interest to take the position that you want them to take. Now, for tip number 5, related to the ask, is around the follow-up. And so after you've made the ask, you're going to be prepared that the person that you're meeting with may not be in a position to give you an answer on the spot. Most times, staffers will need to run the issue by someone in the leadership team or the member themselves before a decision can be made. And this is an excellent opportunity for you to ask to be added to a distribution list, and an excellent time for you to then be able to share more information to help bolster the ask with that office. You also will want to develop the relationship so that you have a long-term relationship with that office, and you can share information as you get, but you want to be judicious with that and how frequently you're sending information, because you don't want to get spammed and you don't want to inundate the staffer's email box to the point that they are blocking you. But knowing, it's important to note that the staffers do play a very integral role in advising their elected official. And so you want to be able to have established a good relationship for being a conduit of information and for that office as well. So these are my 5 tips for how you have a successful and impactful meeting with elected officials. And I wish you much luck in your advocacy meetings, and happy lobbying.
Meeting in person or virtually with your lawmakers is a great way to advance your own community's advocacy, and it's a really empowering experience.
This next section will show you how to schedule meetings with your lawmakers and prepare you for what that meeting interaction will look like.
To find your member of Congress or who to book a meeting with, oftentimes it's easy to use websites like govtrack.us. On pages like this, you can simply type in your mailing address, and right away you see the different offices that your members are, your 2 senators and your 1 representative. Depending on your location, you might have multiple representatives listed if your zip code happens to fall into 2 different congressional districts. So you might be asked to clarify specifically your 9-digit zip code or some additional information about the street you live on. These pages will often link directly to their webpage where you can book a meeting, make a phone call, or sign up for their alerts. Setting up a member with a member of Congress is pretty simple, especially if you know where to look. This is an example of a meeting request that could be sent to an email of a scheduler, for example, in a congressional office or a state office. What's important to highlight in an email to a member of Congress is that you keep the standardized format. Additionally, it's important to highlight how many members are going to be in your meeting, where you are coming from or what group you represent, specifically where you are hoping to meet, and when you would like to meet with that member. I often find it's very important to highlight pretty early on, or in a pretty concise way, what issues you would like to talk about. For example, in this meeting from a congregation, that is just an example, they would be indicated that they're interested in talking about hunger issues. And they even specifically name a particular bill or piece of legislation that they would like to talk about. It's also very important to highlight different assets or stakes that you might have in the local community. For example, this congregation indicates that they have 100 baptized members in a specific district, as well as several feeding ministries that are working to address the issue that they are talking about, or that they might have experience to demonstrate. Oftentimes, it's also very important to mention that you'll be in touch and to let them know if you have any questions. And another example that you could send to a scheduler's email. This one comes from a Lutheran campus ministry, just an example. Similarly, they indicate the importance of where you would like to meet and when. But since a campus ministry might not have as many assets as a congregation in a district, they might want to demonstrate that they're just more interested in learning about faith and public life or the legislative process. It's still important to highlight specific issues, though, that you might want to discuss. Oftentimes, it's also very important to say, especially if you've never met with the member before, that you'd be interested in a photo. Many politicians love public presence, and things like this really help increase their visibility, and that might just add a little extra incentive to your meeting. If you do not have the meeting email address of your scheduler, because those are often hard to find, oftentimes you can make other meeting requests through their direct webpage as well. This is an example of Senator Brian Schatz's webpage, and most lawmaker pages are like this. Oftentimes they will have a contact field, and somewhere around there that you would see something like book a meeting request. On these, you will often see a form where you can specifically list out different fields such as the name of the person booking this, your organization such as the congregation you're coming from, and other information such as the street address of the host. If possible, be sure to use the street address that is in the district or the state that is being requested if it's a senator. Also very important is to note the location of the meeting, the preferred date range that you would like to meet, and preferred times. And perhaps the most important field would be the purpose of the meeting. I often would use some of the fields that we discussed earlier, such as discussing immigration issues such as S129, or that you are specifically a campus ministry group. Oftentimes, the most important information is the preferred date range that you're hoping to book a meeting on, though. Depending on where you want to meet, such as Washington, D.C. or Hawaii, the member may or may not be in different locations depending on the legislative schedule. It's often important to go to the U.S. Senate webpage, such as ussenate.gov or house.gov, to see when they will or will not be in the district. On days that say state work period, that often means that they'll be back home, going across their state, and basically meeting with different constituents such as yourself. But if you happen to be in Washington, D.C. for a date, picking days that are outside state work periods would be more optimal. Picking date ranges during these periods will often help prioritize your meeting, because the scheduler will be able to have more flexibility of booking your time in a correct range.
Most meetings open up with the role of the introducer. The introducer is often the person who helps set up the meeting with the member of Congress or the staff person. The role of the introducer is to basically set up the context of why the group is meeting with the member on that day, briefly the issue that you wish to discuss, and some other background information about the congregation or whatever team that you have. The introducer then opens it up to a round of introductions.
The storyteller shares personal stories, statistics, and other data, or a description of how this issue intersects with their faith in your district. Keep the timing concise. Aim for about 2 minutes per anecdote. Keep in mind that you can have multiple storytellers in a group, with each focusing on a different illustration of the importance of the issue. To make it look more like a conversation, it is helpful for each storyteller to come with a question for the staffer. For example, where does Congresswoman X stand on this issue? And what are the ways the faith community or Lutherans can be helpful on this issue?
In addition to the other roles, it's often helpful for a group to have a closer or a timekeeper to keep track of how the meeting is going. The main role of the closer, though, is to make sure that you follow up on any commitments made by either party during the meeting, and to also maybe ask some key questions to make commitments happen if they haven't already been listed. For example, some good questions might be, what is the best way a group can connect with the office in the future? Or perhaps, what is the member going to be doing on this issue within the next 2 weeks? Sometimes it's also helpful for the timekeeper or the closer to offer a brief prayer to end the meeting, to thank the member for their service, and to let them know that your community is praying for them and their leadership in Congress. Be sure to let us know how your meetings go so that we can better connect you with other advocates, and maybe also share tips and tricks that might be good moving forward in the future.
Make sure to tag us at ELCA Advocacy on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Why does local and state advocacy matter when it's already being done at the federal level? 24-hour news cycles convince us that everything exciting is happening in Washington, D.C., but many decisions that affect our families, congregations, and faith communities are made by state, municipal, and county governments. Hi, my name is Regina Banks, and I'm the director of the Lutheran Office of Public Policy, California. LOPP works on issues that affect everyday bread and butter issues right here in the Golden State. When we work on issues like ending deep childhood poverty and securing clean, safe, affordable drinking water, local assembly, Senate, and municipal policymakers have more impact on our lives than anyone with an office in Washington. They often have or know of grants, which can be significant for smaller programs. They control zoning laws that strengthen or weaken environmental protection efforts. They can work with or manage local and regional housing offices that promote affordable housing and wraparound services such as mental health care, childcare, and life skills courses. And they make introductions for us to other organizations such as chambers of commerce, interfaith advocacy organizations, and individual decision makers in state municipal agencies with which we can partner. Additionally, their whole office staff is likely to be our neighbor with a vested interest in our local community. Additionally, local advocacy has a bigger return on investment. It routinely takes months of planning and coordination to influence federal policy, whereas it may only take 2 or 3 well-timed and thoughtful emails to turn your county board of supervisors around. We met with Elk Grove Mayor Bobby Singh Allen last week. She told us that as mayor, it only takes about 4 or 5 emails or the second person to stop her in the grocery store to talk about a matter before it's officially on her radar. That means that you and your coffee circle at church could all decide on Sunday to call your mayor on Monday about a given subject and potentially be talking to her by the end of the week. Your congressperson and their staffs are listening, but you may not hear back from them. And in Washington, nothing happens until next week. Just this morning, I got confirmation that local advocacy not only works to move the agendas that we care about as people of faith, but it is also the key to healing. Last April, during the initial fear and trepidation of the pandemic, we at LOPP instituted Advocacy in Quarantine. On Wednesdays at 12 noon, we gather virtually on Zoom and talk about what's going on federally, on the state level, and in municipalities like Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. It began as a way to process the news of COVID and the resulting human and economic impacts. We talk for 25 minutes, and then we identify 1 or 2 things that we can do that would take about 5 minutes, but would help the situation. Effective advocacy doesn't need to take all day. Well, that group continues to meet, and this week was our local lobby day, where individual congregations set meetings with their assembly and state senators, while those policymakers are home in their districts for the August recess. Most of those meetings were yesterday, and I asked our network to CC me on their follow-up messages to offices. This morning, my inbox was just a flurry of excited emails, pastors and congregations inviting legislators and their district staffs to their God's Work, Our Hands activities this September. I've counted 11 yeses so far, and it hasn't been 24 hours. One particular state senator, an office it's nearly impossible to get a meeting with here in Sacramento, will be the guest for worship with his spouse, no matter how much the president or congressional leadership cares about us or our issues, the likelihood of that kind of encounter is small. But state and local policymakers are simply closer to our lived experience. Finally, as a longtime advocate who's watched our discourse become more and more toxic, I can tell you the answer is not Washington, not for healing. It's too easy to lob bombs of hate and mistrust. In my case, thousands of miles and across a continent, especially if I never need to see them land on real people. For healing, we need personal contact, and that comes regularly and routinely and at home. Thanks to cable news, you no doubt know what Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell look like, and you'd know to stop them if you saw them out, if you had something to discuss. But I'll bet your local school board and board of supervisors has pictures of its members on its website. It may be worth taking a look and remembering. You never know who may be at the table at the newly reopened restaurant right next to you. It could be the conversation at the beginning of a change in your community. Thank you.
Greetings from the Metro Detroit area in Southeast Michigan. My name is Robin McCants. If you've never had a meeting in Washington, D.C., doing so for the first time can feel intimidating. However, if you're prepared, the tension will ease away. When you have an opportunity to meet with local and/or nationally elected officials, it's important to use your time wisely. You may only have a few minutes with the official, and you should have a very clear agenda in mind when you are granted that meeting. You could be meeting with a member of the Senate or House of Representatives, or on the local level with your mayor or council member. Or you could be meeting with a member of their staff. Either way, you have to be prepared. I like to think of the time as an elevator ride. You may only have 1 to 2 floors before the doors open, or you may have the time it takes to get to the top of the building. My first opportunity to meet with Michigan officials came as a participant of Ecumenical Advocacy Days, a faith-based event that brings people of various religious beliefs and practices together to address a common issue. I've also participated with the ELCA Advocacy event in Washington, D.C. In order to use our time wisely, participants are thoroughly prepped with background detail. We have access to numerous workshops, small group meetings, and presentations so that we can gain the critical information about the issues, such as data, personal stories, organizations that work on those issues, timelines, and more. Sometimes the information is not just from a local level, but from across the United States and around the world. Additionally, because many states will have different laws in place, the elected officials may have specific platforms, and participants are broken up into groups based on state. That does not mean we're all of the same opinion, but meeting with our state officials, we offer a shared perspective. Depending on the number of people in the group, you may decide that each person will speak, and if it's a larger group, maybe alternate your speakers. You may have as few as 2 meetings or as many as 4 or 5 meetings in a day. One person may give an overview of why we're there, another might share a personal story, yet another would offer some data, and then someone would present the ask to ask the official to support the issue that's on the table. Utilizing the gifts and skills of the event planners includes having meetings pre-scheduled for you, plus all of the advanced research, and that does boost your confidence. And it also provides an example of what is needed to address an issue of importance to me in my own community. The experiences that I've had has helped me to groom and mentor others to do the same. It doesn't hurt to read the temperature in the room and the body language of those you're meeting with. This can help determine how general or specific you should be with the time that you have. I've had a situation where my group only had 5 minutes with the staffer, no notes were taken, our literature was put into a folder, and we were thanked and escorted out. There are also times when we were allowed 30 to 40 minutes with our issue, and the staff person asked questions and they looked closely at our materials and they took notes. Whatever the experience is, I would suggest that you follow up with a phone call to the local office a week or two after the meeting. Ask for the person that you met with and find out when your elected official will be present in your local district. Making yourself known to the official helps because as constituents, we want results, and those running for election want our votes. Thank you for listening.
Well, welcome back. I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to spend some time together today. We are so grateful that you would spend part of your day with us doing this Advocacy Policymaker Summer School. There are so many unique opportunities that we have to engage with policymakers all throughout the year, and our voices really do make a difference. They really do make a difference. And if we don't use our voices, somebody steps into those breaches and speaks for us. Being engaged with our policymakers could not be more important now than ever. And the most important thing that we want to do is develop those relationships born out of our love of community, our discipleship in Jesus Christ, and our care for the world around us, as well as our neighbors. And we have that opportunity. We're given that grace and that amazing gift to speak and engage policymakers on so many crucial and important issues. I hope you'll join us again. Please reach out to us if you have additional questions, and we want to be here for you so that we can equip you in your future advocacy work. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and may you have a wonderful rest of the summer.
Thank you for joining us for our second ELCA Advocacy Starter Kit session, reflecting on the question, how do I approach policymakers? If you would like more information or to sign up for the ELCA Advocacy Network, visit elca.org/advocacy/signup or use the QR code on your screen. Thank you for joining us today.